Remember back when we'd gather around the TV for big news stories?
Yeah.
Before smartphones and all that? Well, today we're going back to one of those events, the rescue of baby Jessica McClure back in 1987.
Oh, yeah. 18-month-old Jessica who fell down that well in Texas. I remember it like it was yesterday.
It really was a global phenomenon. For 58 hours, the world watched as rescuers tried to get her out. It was broadcast live on CNN.
It kind of feels like a pivotal moment, doesn't it? Like how we consume news changed after that.
For sure. So to really understand this, let's go back to October 14th, 1987, a seemingly normal day in Midland, Texas. Jessica's playing at her aunt's house. It was a typical daycare setting.
And suddenly she disappears. Her mom, Sissy, stepped inside for a quick phone call, and in those few minutes, the unthinkable happened.
She'd fallen down this abandoned well. It was an 8-inch wide pipe that went down 22 feet. Can you imagine the panic?
It's every parent's worst nightmare, and that narrow well made it even scarier.
First responders got there quickly. Officer Bobby Joe Hall was leading the charge. They could hear Jessica's cries, so they knew she was alive.
But figuring out how to get to her was tough. It was pitch black down there, so they started lowering things down a microphone with a flashlight, oxygen, and a video camera.
Yeah, trying to see what they were dealing with.
Right. And when they got that camera down there, it was heartbreaking. Jessica was wedged in with her legs split, one foot dangling, the other pinned near her head.
So how did they even begin to get her out?
They realized they couldn't dig straight down because of the bedrock. So they came up with this plan to dig another shaft next to the well and then tunnel across to reach Jessica.
That sounds incredibly risky.
It was, but they didn't have a choice. And this is where being in Midland, Texas really helped them.
What do you mean?
Well, Midland was an oil town. They had all this equipment and know-how from the oil industry that most places wouldn't have.
I see. So they could tap into that expertise.
Exactly. They brought in this huge drilling machine called a rat hole rig, something used in oil exploration.
Wow. So this unlikely connection really played a part in the rescue.
Absolutely. The rat hole rig helped them drill through that Texas bedrock much faster.
But it wasn't just the machinery, right? This whole town came together to help.
You got it. Imagine this. The backyard was full of firefighters, paramedics, police volunteers, all working together to try to get Jessica out.
That's incredible. A whole community united for this little girl.
It really shows the human element of this story. It wasn't just about technology and engineering. It was about people coming together in a crisis.
It's a powerful image. And all the while, CNN's cameras are there, broadcasting it to the world.
People everywhere were glued to their TVs watching this tiny child trapped underground.
And it was the constant coverage. The ability to see it unfold in real time. That was new, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The baby Jessica story changed how we experience news. Like, it ushered in this new era of 247 coverage.
Mind-boggling to think about the impact of this one event. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about that more later.
Right, because the rescue itself is a whole other story.
Yeah.
An incredible feat of engineering and perseverance.
We were just talking about how the baby Jessica story really changed the way we consume news. It was like the beginning of 2047 news coverage.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the rescue itself. I mean, getting Jessica out was no easy feat.
No, it wasn't. They called in this mining expert, David Lilly, to take charge of the operation.
What did he bring to the table?
Well, he knew they needed some serious equipment to get through that solid rock. They ended up using drill bits made from tungsten carbide.
Tungsten carbide. What's so special about that?
It's much harder than what they were using before, so it could cut through the rock more efficiently.
Okay. So they had the right tools, but it still must have been a slow and difficult process.
Oh, absolutely. It was inch by inch drilling with the whole world watching and waiting. Can you imagine the pressure?
I can only imagine. And remember, this was before the internet and social media, so people were getting their updates from TV and radio.
Exactly. The whole world was on edge, waiting to see if they could get her out.
And then when they finally reached the well wall, they hit another snag, right?
They did. The rock there was even harder than they expected.
So what do they do? Do they have to come up with a whole new plan?
Pretty much. They had to use this technique called high-pressure water jet cutting to break through that last layer.
Water jet cutting.
Well,
It sounds pretty intense.
it was, but it worked. And once they got through that final layer, it was time for the most dangerous part of the rescue.
Actually getting Jessica out of that narrow shaft.
That's right. And they needed someone small and brave enough to go down there. That's where Robert O'Donnell, a Midland firefighter, came in.
I remember hearing about him. He was a real hero.
He was, and what's amazing is that he was actually claustrophobic.
Really? So going down that tight tunnel must have been terrifying for him.
Absolutely. But he did it anyway. He knew Jessica's life was on the line.
I remember reading an article about his experience. He said it was like trying to slither through a tightly wrapped sleeping bag.
Oh, yeah. It gives you a sense of how small and confined that space was. And it must have been hot and sweaty down there, too.
Just awful.
Yeah.
But he finally reached Jessica. And even then, getting her free wasn't easy.
No, they had to be incredibly careful. They even lubricated the tunnel with Vaseline to help maneuver her tiny body out.
I can't even imagine what that moment must have been like when they finally brought her to the surface.
There's actually footage of it. You can see the rescuers cheering and the crowd going wild. There were church bells ringing all across Midland.
It must have been such a relief for everyone involved after all that time and effort.
Oh, definitely. It was a moment of pure joy and celebration.
It really was a story that captured the hearts of people around the world. Everyone was rooting for baby Jessica.
It shows how certain events can tap into our shared humanity and bring us together.
But as we know, even happy endings can have a complicated aftermath. The intense media attention, the donations, and the pressure of fame, it all had a profound impact on everyone involved.
It's true. And that's what we'll explore next. The after effects of the rescue and how life changed for baby Jessica and those who saved her.
So we've talked about the incredible rescue of baby Jessica and how that story really changed the way we consume news. But the story didn't end there, did it?
Not at all. In fact, it was just the beginning for Jessica and everyone involved.
You're right. Because with all that media attention came a lot of attention from the public and a lot of generosity.
People from all over the world were sending donations, cards, gifts. They had to set up a trust fund for Jessica.
Because there was just so much money pouring in.
Exactly. And, by her 25th birthday, that trust fund had grown to over $800,000.
Wow, that's amazing. But it's also a lot of pressure for a young person.
Definitely. It's a double-edged sword. It's incredible that people were so generous. But sudden wealth like that can be difficult to manage.
And it wasn't just the money, right? Yeah. There was the constant media scrutiny and the pressure of being in the public eye.
Absolutely. Jessica's family was thrown into the spotlight, and it wasn't always easy for them.
Especially in a small town like Midland.
Right. Everyone knew their business, and there were definitely people who judged them.
Like that story about Jessica's mom, Sissy, at the Denny's?
Oh, yeah. When she said, "Do you know who I am? I'm Jessica's mother."
And the neighbor said, "If it wasn't for a whole lot of other people, you wouldn't be anybody's mother."
Ouch. That's gonna hurt.
It really shows how fame can change things, even in a small town.
And it probably didn't help that Sissy and Jessica's father, Chip, ended up getting divorced a few years later.
It's sad, but I guess not surprising when you think about the pressure they were under.
And it wasn't just Jessica's family who had to deal with the aftermath. The rescuers were affected too.
Especially Robert O'Donnell, the firefighter who pulled Jessica out.
His story is really heartbreaking. He was flown all over the country for appearances and awards ceremonies.
He was even on Oprah.
He was. It was a whirlwind.
Oh, hi.
But when the attention died down, he had a hard time adjusting back to normal life.
What happened?
He struggled with depression. He got addicted to painkillers. And tragically, he ended up taking his own life a few years later.
It's a reminder that fame can be a really heavy burden, even for someone who deserves it.
And it makes you think about the long-term impact of events like this, not just on the people involved, but on the whole community.
Yeah, the media circus moves on,
Yeah.
but the people who are there, they have to live with the consequences.
Exactly. But in the midst of all that, there's one bright spot.
Jessica herself?
Yes. Despite everything she went through, she grew up healthy and happy.
I read that she has no memory of the rescue itself.
Isn't that amazing? And she went on to graduate high school, get married, have children of her own.
That's wonderful to hear. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
And even though she couldn't access the trust fund until she was 25, people continued to donate to it for years.
That's really heartwarming. It shows the lasting impact of her story.
And it brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, about how the baby Jessica story changed the way we consume news.
Back then, it was all about gathering around the TV and watching the story unfold together.
Right, it was a shared experience. But today, we're constantly bombarded with information from all directions.
And it can be hard to know what to focus on, what really matters.
So it's important to remember stories like Jessica's, to look beyond the headlines and think about the human impact.
To consider the long-term consequences of these events, both good and bad.
Exactly, because the world is a complicated place, and sometimes the happy endings aren't always so simple.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the story of baby Jessica.
It's been a fascinating journey back in time.
It has, and we hope you've enjoyed it. But before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought.
Think back to the news events that shaped your own life, the ones that you remember most vividly.
How has the way you experience and react to news changed since then?
And what can we learn from the past as we navigate the complexities of today's world?
It's something to ponder as we all try to make sense of the constant flow of information.
We hope you'll join us again for our next deep dive into the past. Until then, thanks for listening.